Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Mandel Benartzi, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel today about Project Braveheart. This is the first time that our team is publicly speaking about this VR study that was developed at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital in partnership with Virtual Ventures and supported by private donors as well as Oculus. On a personal note, I have to say it was one of the most meaningful and fun initiatives that I've been involved with, so I really want to thank the team. And without further ado, I'd like everyone to take 30 seconds to introduce themselves. Dr. Greenleaf?
I'm Walter Greenleaf. I'm a research scientist by training, behavioral neuroscientist. I spend a lot of my time doing basic research, but really my favorite thing to do is to work with medical VR startups, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm Ann Dubin. I'm a pediatric cardiologist at Stanford, and I'm probably the least techie person you have ever met. But Walter got me extremely excited about this project and thinking about different ways that we could help our patients, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Hi, I'm Don Bland. I'm a producer, and I was basically the one that facilitated the techie part of the study.
And as for me, I'm founder of Alpha Presence, which is a consultancy that helps institutions and hospitals integrate AR and VR to improve patient care. Previously, I was at Samsung Next, where I was leading marketing for their VR initiatives and investments. So before we begin the study, I have a couple of questions for the audience, even though I can barely see you. How many of you have ever been to a hospital? Can you raise your hand? Okay, most of us. How many of you have looked forward to going to a hospital? Really?
Shiraz works in a hospital.
Oh, Shiraz works. Okay, fine, fair enough. Well, this is our reaction as adults. Imagine the fear and the anxiety that children feel when they know that they need to come to a hospital for a heart procedure. So that's something to keep in mind. So my first question, I guess you guys will share the mic, is for Dr. Dubin and Dr. Greenleaf. Can you tell us a little bit more about this project and how Project Braveheart came about and what the mission was?
Sure. Actually, I think I'll let Ann start because she really catalyzed the whole thing by saying this would be so cool. I think this was the exact question you
That
used.
was exactly the words. So I got to meet Walter last year at the Stanford Human Virtual Reality Lab. And I started to see actually what virtual reality was doing, mainly in regards to our child psychology colleagues. And Walter and I started talking, and we kind of came to the conclusion that, wow, this could really help some of my patients. So what I do for a living is I take care of children who have arrhythmia problems. And one of the things I take care of is when a child has an abnormally fast heart rhythm, we can bring them for a procedure that's called an ablation and actually cure the problem. But it's kind of a scary experience, especially we do this anywhere from age 5, usually up to late teens. And for any of them, it's pretty frightening. They're coming into the hospital, they're usually well kids before all this, who usually have not had much experience in a hospital. They're coming in, they are getting IVs, they are going into a room that looks like an operating room while they're awake with lots of equipment that is quite intimidating. They're then taken away from their parents and have this procedure done, usually with anesthesia while they're asleep, but still that whole getting up to that point of the procedure can be quite terrifying. And so we kind of decided that this would be a really nice starting point for investigating how we can really help our patients. So I'll let you go from there.
Well, when I heard Ann's enthusiasm for the concept, we started to put together a team to go after it. And let me mention some of the basic premises here. One of the premises is that we can reduce anticipatory anxiety by having people know what's about to happen. The scariest thing is your imagination in some cases. And it was the other premise here was that one of the good uses of VR in terms of spherical video is to have people have a feeling like they've been someplace before. Now, it's better if you can interact with the environment, which we can do in a computer-generated environment, but that's not as photorealistic. It's especially hard if we're putting people like Anne and some of the patients into the virtual environment. So we need to be able to green screen in and put people in. So anyhow, I've used this as an excellent use case of emerging technology. And we should emphasize this. This is a study. It's not just something we've rolled out. This is something we're studying, and we're collecting data about salivary cortisol, the patient experience, objective experience, patient self-reports, and other measurable parameters. It's my belief that once things go further along, we'll also start seeing potential effects on the results of the procedure, not just the patient experience, whether they were stressed or not stressed, but the does being stressed less lead to better results? And it'll take us a while before we have that data, but we thought this would be a fantastic application of VR technology, and we put together the team. And this might be a good time for Don to jump in and talk about why he's excited about this and his background and how you made it happen. And Don, I should compliment you. I know a lot of people who develop in VR, and one of the world experts, Jeremy Bailenson, took a look at Braveheart and said, "This is fantastic. I've never seen a better implementation of spherical video." So you should maybe tell us a little bit about your background, why you're excited about this, but how did you do it? How did you make it happen?
Mm-hmm.
So I come from a world of cameras. I used to be a cinematographer. I filmed with Discovery and National Geographic and a bunch of other high-profile companies for a very long time, and learned a lot about cameras and imaging technology as we would build different cameras for different applications. And then in 2010, I started a television network for Sony and Discovery and IMAX called 3Net, which was the first stereoscopic television network in America. And from there, I found this linear progression into VR and other immersive environments. So I guess it was in August, I came and met with Anne, and we sat at a plastic table outside of the Lucile Packard.
The Doobie Brothers Courtyard.
Was that the Doobie Brothers Courtyard?
Doobie Brothers Courtyard.
So anyway, she explained this vision that, we wanted to help kids be less afraid and to have a better patient outcome, and I got very excited about it. So some of the people that I had known over the years at Sony developing cameras for 3D had sort of moved into VR environments, and so we found a customized camera rig that they had developed out of the University of Texas, which shoots by far the best spherical video I've ever seen in my life. And we, through the process, refined the software technique for stitching, and then basically we gamified it, and we had done some stuff within Braveheart that I've never seen before, which is spherical video inside of Unity. We put apps within apps to where kids could transduce what they were doing within VR without ever having to go backwards. And they never broke the immersion walls, which I think led to something that was very engaging and really incredible.
Don, can you walk us through the content about what the children were seeing?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, three parts of it. The first is a tour of the hospital. And so what we did is we set it up to where the kids understand the physical environments of the hospital. There are virtual maps that take them from room to room, so they have a sort of three-dimensional processing of where they're going to go inside of this larger structure. And then they are given the guide by a I guess it's a tour guide, right? It's a kid who we green screened into a virtual kiosk that goes with them wherever they go inside of Braveheart. The kid is someone who's had this procedure before and talks to them in a very age-appropriate nomenclature that it's very conversational. This room does this. This might be a little bit uncomfortable here, and it without necessarily guiding them into points where they project to be scared. It just kind of gives them what they should expect on the day of their surgery. And then within that, Rebecca was able to source for us apps. And one of them is from Life VR, and another one is from a developer out of, I think it was out of Austin.
Unella Design.
Yeah, and so, kids can do different apps to help reduce their stress levels if they start to get stressed out within the environment.
Yeah. Now might be a good time to talk about just the concept of psychoeducation. Dr. Dubin, can you further elaborate about psychoeducation and why this is important in a patient experience?
Well, I think there are two things that are going on with this experience, and that we're hoping to prove is going to be helpful in this experience. The first thing is something we call stress inoculation. And actually, before we do this, I should actually acknowledge another member of our team who unfortunately can't be here today, as she is now the proud mother of her second child, having been just born a month ago, Lauren Schneider, who's a child psychologist who works very, very closely with us. And she really spearheaded a lot of these psychosocial issues that were surrounding this. But to get back to where we were, there's stress inoculation where you actually get seen, you see where you're going, you see what's going to be happening, you experience the actual thing that is stressing you out in a very safe manner. So the children not only see the different rooms, they also see themselves getting an IV, and so can kind of anticipate scary things. At the same time, what Don was referring to is we have apps that are embedded that if they are starting to feel stressed or they're starting to feel anxious, they can actually go into these apps and practice mindfulness and practice deep breathing and relaxation techniques to help kind of calm themselves down during these times of stress. And the more that they end up actually rehearsing these things and trying them, the easier it becomes for them to do on the day of the procedure. To skip ahead just a little bit, we've actually started the study. We're doing a small study, a randomized control study that is going to look at this, and we've gotten 10 out of our 40 patients in already, and the patients who have gone through have actually said, learning these techniques, I used them the day of the procedure. It did amazing things for me as far as calming me down. So we don't have results yet, but at least anecdotally, it's sounding like we're really starting to do what we wanted to do with this.
I think for our audience, we need to maybe portray how we use the technology. Who is issued the system? When, do they take it home with them? What are the logistics of how we use Braveheart? And I think I showed a very clipped video earlier. Not everybody in the room now has seen that clip, so maybe we should also just sort of describe it a little bit more.
So the study itself right now consists of two groups of patients. Patients who go through the procedure the normal way, so they get an explanation from their doctor about the fact that they're having their procedure done. We explain what's going to happen to them. We have a service that's called Child Life Services. These are people who are trained to help children in stressful situations. They do play therapy. They also will do different techniques to help calm them down. That's our normal techniques. And so we compared that to patients who received our Braveheart experience. And so patients, once they have agreed and consented to be in the study, and their parents have consented for them to be in the study, they're randomized to either going the normal way or to receive the Braveheart app and headset a week before their procedure. They're instructed to use the app and at least 3 times during that week. During that week, they're also asked to be recording their salivary cortisol levels, and cortisol is a hormone that helps us look at stress in the body, and it's a biological marker. We also are performing specific questionnaires or indexes, something called the State Trait Anxiety Index, which is a well-documented psychological inventory to assess both the patient's stress level as well as their parents' stress level. Because we're not only looking at our patients, but we're looking at their parents, because we know this is quite the interactive dyad, and if you have one stressed, the other is going to be stressed. And we do this at different points. We do this right before the procedure, we do this right after the procedure, and we're going to compare the patients who went through Braveheart to patients who didn't and see who is doing well. That's about it. So actually what Braveheart is patients, the first scene that they see, first they have a little tutorial about how to use the equipment that Don put together. It makes it much easier for them to understand. This is a how-to for them. Though most of them, it was really interesting when we were just kind of playing with this when we first got it, we could have a 2-year-old use it and have no problems. And it was not patients, it was our children kind of thing. But we had 2-year-old children using the equipment, and they could figure it out really rather quickly, which amazed me. Whereas the 40s and 50-year-old physicians are saying, wait, how do I do this? Where do I turn? And how does this work?
Everything's upside down.
Exactly. Wait, I have to turn my head. But it's really intuitive for children to be able to use this technology. Once they learn how to use it, the first scene they see is actually the entrance to the hospital. And our hospital has a very specific look to it. There's topiary animals in front, and it's got balloons, and it's just very inviting. And so they see the front of the hospital. They then walk in through the hospital into the lobby. They see the lobby. We have patients in the lobby. They're just kind of hanging out, and they can see people. And they, at that point, are introduced to our tour guide, which is either a boy or a girl, depending on what they'd like, who starts discussing with them, hey, I went through this procedure. You're going to go through this procedure. This is the lobby. This is your first step. They then kind of go downstairs to the pre-op area. They get their blood pressure taken. They meet a nurse down there. And then they move into the area where they're going to get their IV. They see themselves getting an IV, or they see somebody else, but same basic thing. And they, at that point, meet their physicians. They meet myself, and they meet our anesthesiologist, Dr. Char, and we kind of give them a little spiel down there. They then go through the halls up to the cath lab, and we show them the cath lab where the procedure will be done. During these times, we also kind of will prompt them that, okay, you're getting a little bit nervous. Look right down there. Here are these other apps you can go into to learn how to calm yourself down, to learn deep breathing, to learn mindfulness techniques. And we actually ask them to try this several times through the app. Finally, they come back to the recovery room, they recover, and then they actually go out the front door of the hospital fully fixed. So it's the whole thing probably takes, if they don't spend a lot of time in the relaxation apps, probably about 10 minutes. And we did ask them to do this 3 times. Most patients are telling me they're doing it more than that, the ones who are doing it so far.
And you're collecting data, aren't you?
Exactly. So what we're collecting, as I said, is this anxiety inventory. That's our primary outcome. We're collecting salivary cortisol levels, which is this hormone that measures stress. We're collecting blood pressures. We're collecting heart rates. And we're getting patients' experiences and asking them what they think about the procedure as well.
But Dawn, isn't there also a back end?
Yes. I'm sorry. I'll let you talk about that.
So inside of Braveheart, there was several analytics that we keep, and one of them is how long we stay in each environment. There are several gaze cues that are recorded. There are, when you start Braveheart, since we were sent it home, we wanted to be able to understand who was using it and how. So in the beginning, you pick who you are, whether you're a patient or you're their parent or you're someone else like a sibling. And then based on that, you have different experiences, or not different experiences, I'm sorry, different analytics that will be pulled up on the back end so that you can actually collect the data and then analyze it later.
Can you talk about the challenges that you had in creating the content? Like, for example, there's so many different ways to create VR content. Why did you choose it? And 360 video versus, say, CG or volumetric VR. And how did the age demographic influence your decision?
Wow, that's a great question. There's a lot of answers in there. I feel like this was beyond everything a group collaboration into figuring out how to do this, because I had never worked with a hospital before. I had never really done a scientific study before. Most of the stuff I've ever done has been, entertainment based. So one was the
Deadliest catch, right?
the thing that I thought was most engaging was the idea of how do we capture a kid's imagination and hold it, right? And so that came from having a great script, and it came from Lauren basically saying, this is the way that kids are feeling, right? When they come into the hospital, this is what I'm telling them on the backside. And so we started to bring that into the script, and then it was having Anne walk us through every piece because she knows it so well. And then Walter brought in the science, and you brought in the apps, and it was just this big team kind of huddle to say, how do we make this the best we can? And so, I'm just the big dumb monkey with the camera, but that was how we made it. So
Yeah. And can we talk a little bit about how we think that VR modifies behavior and how we apply this to the study? Dr. Greenleaf?
Well, I think we're still learning. There's a lot of research to be done about first person versus third person experience versus passive watching. But I can tell you this from looking at the research that's been out there. If you can engage the patient actively in something, which we do by having the apps built in and by exploring the environment, it's much better than having to read about something or watch a video about something. I think if you'd done a video of the hospital saying here's the room here and here's the room there, I think people would have turned off. Maybe it's too scary for them to see, but here they get to explore and they get to meet people and they get to hear other kids. So part of this is the new narrative of how we can use this new technology to tell a story and to influence people's attitudes and behavior. We're still learning. Like we said, it's a study, but basically the premise is that by better engagement, we can allow people to address their fears and build the skills they need to address those fears. And again, at a brain level, we're also reducing the situational anticipation anxiety because they're now familiar with something. So,
and just to pile on to that, we actively tried to solve this problem in live acquisition video by figuring out how do you do that? How do you not force someone to leave a room, right? And you just have them, and the kids can sit there for as long as they want to, and all that data is recorded to where they might sit in the cath lab for longer than they sit in, the room where they get Jello, right? So essentially what we did is we made certain parts of it interactive, and then to be able to make it modular to where it would fit on a phone, we looped certain environments that never change. So when you shoot in VR, in 360 capture, we were using a camera with 6 lenses, 6 individual cameras stitched together. And so what we were able to do is modify our content to where there's certain cameras that are hot cameras and there's certain cameras that don't do much, right? And so those certain cameras that don't do much, that are just containing 360 video, we would loop those pieces over and over to make data efficiencies. So essentially that when a kid went into a room, they never had to ever leave. They got to say when it was over. We gave them an optical cue that said, look at this when you're ready to leave. And other than that, it was kind of a choose your own adventure. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So one of the apps we used a couple of different apps for mindfulness and stress inoculation. And so one of them was Lumen, another one was Unello Design, where we basically taught them diaphragmatic breathing. My question to the panel, and I know we've been discussing this for a while, where is the role of mindfulness in all of this? And from a VR perspective, do we say, is this hype or is this something that's necessary with every stress inoculation study? And do we have more information about it? Yeah.
So I'll see what you think. But the easy answer for me is, especially in children, we don't know entirely yet. Okay. We do believe that, and Lauren has some very nice data suggesting that teaching children mindfulness, this is kind of the new buzzword in adults. Everybody talks about mindfulness and everybody has their mindfulness app on their phone.
That's why I'm asking.
Right, I know. And children, there is some very interesting data that is suggesting that it's quite helpful. I think this is still ongoing, but everything so far is promising. I think you have to modify it for children a little bit, especially even simple, stupid stuff like how long the breath is when you're trying to teach them deep breathing. That has to be changed for a child's breath as opposed to an adult breath. And so there are some things that need to be tweaking, but I think that's another area that we do want to look into. We've actually started talking about that a little bit. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
But, this is something that you've been doing even before the VR study, right? Teaching children mindfulness.
Not me personally, but Laura.
Dr. Schneider.
Yes, but Dr. Schneider, indeed. She teaches mindfulness. Actually, she uses something she calls a glitter jar. It's really kind of cool. It's a little kind of almost like a baby food jar that she puts glycerin and glitter in, and kind of they shake it up, and they use that as a example of when your life is swirling and things are getting crazy, you can't see through it. And then if you can kind of calm yourself down and think about different parts of your body, or you can talk about trying to concentrate just on breathing, things settle out and you can kind of see through it. And so she uses techniques like that usually in her practice from day to day. But specifically looking at it in regards to something like this, we don't know of anything else right now. And there may be stuff out there, and I may be wrong, but we don't know of anything else right now.
Well, to the developers out there and the scientists and entrepreneurs, this is an opportunity. One of the great things about VR is that we collect data. While people are in it, we see where they look, we see what they do, how they spend time, and we can collect physiological data to go hand in hand with that. We can also, if we're clever, study people where they go and what they do in their life and what triggers their anxiety, etc. And I think data will reveal a lot of this. I think there's some excellent opportunities to take the paradigm that we've talked about here to places like refugee camps or disaster areas where there's a huge amount of stress. We can see what works. Mindfulness. There's different flavors of mindfulness and different ways of implementing it. So, let's stand up some apps. Let's collect some data. Let's see what works for children, what works for adults, what works for people who are in pain, and use the data to answer that question, right, which we both don't know the answer to yet.
Yeah. Okay, so one last question before we give the audience a chance for a couple of Q&As. So some say that VR adoption is years away, right? This is something that, every SVVR we talk about, every conference we talk about. The question is, when it comes to digital health and the healthcare space, why is VR one of the leading technologies that we should be using and thinking about? And if so, why?
That's what I'm all about. I feel very strongly that one of the great potential uses of VR is through the whole spectrum of healthcare. So I'm probably too biased about it, but in answer to your question as to why, it's because medicine right now is needing to change. We have a big healthcare crisis coming with an aging population. We have to do something about it. We need to reduce the cost, and VR is particularly effective at doing some things that we haven't been able to do. To collect more data from the patient, to do more ecologically valid assessments and interventions, to push VR out away from just the hospital, but have people take it home and stay connected with their clinicians and their physicians. And you might want to talk about your next study as an example. So yes, is my answer. It's a great opportunity. And that's why I think people who are in this room are here too.
So in our discussions with Walter and Don and Rebecca, I think they've created a monster basically because we now have about 4 or 5 other specific areas that we want to look at. I think this is kind of interesting because when I think about, we've been really struggling with the idea of VR in healthcare, and I probably want to make it a little bit broader than VR because augmented reality, all these other digital technologies, I think fit under that same major umbrella, and we at Packard are really trying to figure out how to make this work on a much more comprehensive level at the hospital. Packard is very interested in being in Silicon Valley and being the leading edge of this. And I would encourage anybody who has ideas and wants to talk to us, we are happy to talk. But that being said, we think of right now 3 major buckets of areas that we're interested in working on. Obviously, there's education and using VR for our educational experiences. One good example of something that we're trying to get moving here is specifically in simulation therapy. One of the things that we know is that if you simulate experiences with healthcare workers, that they actually can do much better in the real thing. We learned this from the airline industry where pilots undergo simulation training for very long periods of time so that they can deal with emergencies. We do the same thing for physicians where they have to experience a life-threatening event in a patient and react to it. The problem with simulation therapy is it's really expensive and it's really difficult to get the space to do it, and you need a lot of equipment and a lot of people. If we can do this using virtual reality or augmented reality or some other digital technology, we can do this almost anywhere at any time and be training next generation of physicians and young physicians into how to do things better. A good example of this is difficult conversations. Probably the hardest thing that anyone in pediatrics has to deal with is trying to work with a family in a child who is not going to get better and who is actually terminal. And how do you help families get through that and the children get through that? We believe that simulation is a great way to try and teach physicians how to have these difficult conversations with parents and children. And so this is one area that we're starting to investigate. The other areas that we're thinking about, obviously, is imaging and 3D imaging, and how do you get it for surgeons and for physicians to be able to see things like what does the inside of a congenital heart disease looks like. If a patient has a hole in their heart, how do we actually get to see what that looks like as we're training and where that is for our surgeons to fix. And then finally, what we're working on right now is the patient experience part of this. And can we use these new technologies to help our patients do better? So such as stress inoculation. We're thinking right now of trying to use virtual reality in exercise and outfitting them with a virtual reality bike that they bring home so that they can do rehab at home rather than have to come into the hospital, which is very costly and very difficult for parents to get their kids in, especially if they're traveling 3 hours to get there, to get them excited about exercise. So that's another area. And finally, to help patients as far as adherence to medications. Patients who have been transplanted is a great example. So transplanted patients need to take their medicines at all times. If they don't take their medicines, they die. I mean, it's as opposed to other kinds of medical problems. And unfortunately, teenagers think they're invincible, and sometimes they stop taking their medicine, and unfortunately, sometimes they die. And so we want to show patients through avatars, okay, this is what happens if you stop taking your medicine. You don't get to go to the prom, you don't get to go out and hang out with your friends, you don't graduate from high school, you're in the hospital and you're feeling really lousy. And if you do everything right, well, yeah, look, you get to see yourself 3 years from now and what you're doing. And so these are all areas that we really are excited about. I kind of threw out like 5 different ideas that we're working on. But we actually, right now, and I'll put a plug in, we need help. So anyone who has thoughts on how to make some of these things happen, we're happy to talk to. All right.
Yeah. Don, do you have anything else to add regarding, what excites you as far as creating content for, what are the use cases?
As far as this project is concerned, just helping kids was so high on my list, and I think that this is one of those applications that isn't necessarily vapor. It's not, we're not doing something for the glory or for any vapid cause. It's really incredible to see, kids have, potentially better outcomes after their surgeries, and for me, that's what made it really a high priority.
Yeah, great. So we have a couple of minutes for the audience. Does anybody have a question? Because
So we can see people. We're talking to the dark.
I know. And if you do, can you please stand up and introduce yourself? Oh, finally. Okay, woman in the back. Go ahead.
I was curious, have you done much studying of the brain while they're in VR? In what areas in the brain sort of light up or active in VR that aren't, like say you're watching an animation or anything stuff?
We haven't done that, but there have been groups that have looked at not only what parts light up, but when we teach someone a cognitive behavioral skill, such as weight management or mood management, what parts of the brain change. And we use VR to elicit an emotional response. If you want to study the brain, you have to activate the brain. So there's this project I'm doing at Stanford with Lee Williams, who is looking at 400 patients as they learn weight management and mood management skills. She's imaging the brain. We use VR to show them a scene that is makes them angry, a scene that makes them happy, a scene that makes them feel anxious, a scene that makes... we have different emotional probes to see what lights up in the brain, and we study the brain's resting state and its response to an emotional stimulus. And VR is really key for that. If we just use a photograph or a movie clip or a sound to do it, it's not as robust. So their VR is an important research tool. And we're still learning. And it would actually, it would be cool if we had the funding to go back to see our kids who master stress management, what changes in their brain. But that's a whole other study.
That would be really cool.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Can you stand up and say your name?
Yeah, my name's Eddie. I'm from Relax VR. One question I had was, what's
So, obviously, getting their heart rhythm fixed is not the only procedure that children go through in the hospital. So we really are starting to plan ahead for as long as this works, which we're hoping that we're going to be able to 100% say it does in the next couple of months, we would like to go ahead and expand this to other procedures. So cardiac catheterizations, where they measure pressures and take pictures in the heart, surgeries. Any child who needs to go to the operating room, we can do the same kind of thing. The really kind of slick thing that Don and Walter did with this was they actually made this so that we can reuse a lot of the video that's already been shot. And so we can just change the people and therefore change what procedure it is. And so our hope is, we're opening a new hospital in the next year, that before the hospital opens that we will do some more filming, get all that done, and then be able to produce this for each of the different procedures that children are going to be going through. I have it here.
Yeah. We have an HMD we can show you.
Yeah.
After the panel.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Justin. I work for the business school at Stanford. We've done a lot of work with, preliminary work with VR and 360 video, but part of our problem is selling it to faculty, having them take it seriously. Do you have any advice on how to do that?
Oh, Walter is an incredible, you know what, just send them all over to the virtual reality lab and then have them sit there. I ended up meeting Elmo there, and Elmo freaked me out because Elmo is, in the Stanford Human Virtual Reality Lab, I say this wrong all the time, but that's human see, I do it wrong, Virtual Human Interaction Lab. They have this several different demos, and they're looking at different things. And one of the demos is really scary, that you're kind of standing on a ledge, and all of a sudden the sides come off, and you feel like you're about to fall over any moment, and it freaks you out. I got the being the pediatrician, they thought, okay, we'll give her the kid one, and so they put me in front of Elmo. But it's not like Elmo like this, okay? The Elmo's not your cute little fuzzy 3-foot tall kind of deal. Elmo's 9 feet tall, and it's a little bit terrifying. And you kind of give Elmo his personal space, which is a little bit weird, but yeah. So bring them over there. They'll love it. It's fine. Or get Walter to talk to them. It'll work.
It's one of the general challenges of VR. Unless you've tried it, you don't realize how poignant it can be. So it has a virality factor of 1. So you're going to have to show it to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is Danny from Virtual Life. I have a question with Don. So you choose the 360 video versus CG. Why is that? The CG is supposed to give you more, way to do creative things, can do a lot more impactful things, right, for the user. Why choose video? And then can you reuse a lot of times? All the assets can be reused.
So I started off as a documentarian filmmaker, and so I think that realism goes a long way, especially when you want to elicit a response out of someone. So the reason that we decided not to do a virtual environment, to do the actual physical environments inside of the hospital as realistic as we could, was to be able to give kids the real sense that they were going to be in that room in the imminent future. So we don't think a virtual environment would have done the same thing. It wouldn't have had the same impact. So we tried to make it as realistic as possible.
Let me add one more log to your fire, though, Don. I think with facial expressions, micro expressions of the face, emotional content, we're really not good at doing that with computer-generated images right now. And so in order to see a friendly, sympathetic, caring clinician, and Ann didn't show up in her scrubs, but in the video she's in her scrubs. And I think it's that emotional rapport that we need to connect the kids with, and we just can't do that with computer-generated graphics right now. I think we get a better sense of immersion if kids could run around the room there and open drawers and do things like that. But in this case, we wanted to give them a tour, and we didn't want to have it be too long also. So it worked for this use case. Other cases, computer-generated environments might be more appropriate.
Can you speak up?
Yeah. Two questions if I can. The first is, have you considered bringing the meditation app into headphones that they can take with them during the real experience, so that a touchstone is the virtual to the real? And I actually think that more, I actually want to know, what's your age group? If it's like 8 to 10, that'll work, but when you start to get the 4 to 6-year-olds, because Elmo talking in the background, they can bring Elmo with them and have a, have a vibe.
Right.
It's a great question.
So right now, I think it's a great next step for this. I think once we show that, we should we can even have them bring the headset into the lab and have them use it there until they fall asleep. So with that, we are thinking about doing that as well. Right now, this study goes from 8 to 21. That was another next step, is that instead of having the patient be their tour guide, we were thinking about having cartoon characters like Elmo or Disney princesses, bringing them down to the lab, or superheroes, something like that. And I think that will be, once we start targeting younger children, and we'll probably do that more with the cath lab than the EP lab, because we just don't have that many young kids in that. But for other things, yeah, I think we should think about that for sure.
It should be mentioned there's a large amount of work going on and a lot of validation over the years for using VR as a distraction from painful procedures. And it's something that we're collaborating with some of the other groups at Stanford on, both for chronic and acute pain, using VR as a distraction and training system. So that wasn't part of this study, but it will be part of the things we're doing.
And if I could tack on one more. Sure. Discharge planning for the audience.
Absolutely.
And this is not just post-operative, but for every newborn parent to go home and see the difference between a well-breathing baby and one with difficulty breathing problems. Those are the top 10. That I think is a great broad application.
Sure.
Another area that we're thinking about, there are some children who have very, very weak hearts, and they need basically a mechanical heart to help them while they're waiting to get a heart transplant. Believe it or not, we actually now are sending children home with these artificial hearts, and their families are taking care of them at home. And those are kids who talk about high-stress situation for their parents. And so giving them, these are the things you need to worry about. This is an alarm. This alarm means this. We are not quite clear whether it's going to be virtual reality versus tapes that they see on their phone. But some kind of digital technology that we're going to need to help them to be able to navigate that really important change.
On our roadmap is the idea of having, when a patient shows up in the emergency department or shows up in a clinic, we issue them a system of some sort. It stays with them through their journey at the hospital, and then it goes home with them. And the economic value of being able to do something post-discharge in terms of understanding when is a problem and how to take care of your wounds or how to take care of yourself afterwards, when to call the hospital and when not, and also to connect with support groups. VR is a fantastic platform for post-discharge support, and that's important economically for the hospital systems too.
Okay. We have time for 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Shane Houston, Optum. I'm curious, this is maybe just more of a children in VR question, but we've seen the warnings on kids under 12 shouldn't be using this. I assume that's something to do with IPD, the headset HMD being able to accommodate a smaller IPD than the development of eyes. Is there any new research on the newer HMDs that gives us any kind of a semi-hard line on where that age 4 is?
There's some research going on, and I agree with you about the concern. I'm concerned about the whole vestibular ocular connection with the developing brain. Also, kids have a lot of trouble discerning their imagination from reality, and there's been studies showing that they have trouble identifying what was a virtual experience from a real experience at a certain age group. There's certainly some concerns there. Now, the warnings that you're familiar with, I think a lot of them come from Facebook's rule about kids under, 13, can't be on Facebook, and that gets carried over to Oculus, and that gets carried over to the Gear VR system. That being said, there is some ongoing research. There have been some previous studies. We don't know. We just don't know what the long-term effects of spending a lot of time in a VR environment are on the developing brain, et cetera. My own personal perspective, which is biased, is that when we do the studies, we're going to learn some things that, just like any emerging technology, are areas to watch out for. But I think it's going to be better than going like this all day. I think there's more pluses than minuses, but I would love to see some funding for further research in this area.
I mean, I think that's a discussion that we've had with video games and with TV when every new medium comes out. So, yeah. One last question. Go ahead, the woman in the back. You, yes.
This after Braveheart, this is for VR. For kids who are 8 and under, can we replicate the same thing for on an iPad to see the same content in AR?
Done.
Yes. So any 360 environment can be isolated on a flat screen by using accelerometer technology, as long as you have a spherical environment that it's in. The reason that we used VR was the immersion factor. But any one of these experiences can be used on a 360 viewer device over the web, or can be used on a phone in a spherical environment. You know, it's basically the cardboard experience without the viewer.
I think for pain distraction or for stress inoculation, the more immersive you are, the better. Because this is scary to go through a tour of the hospital when you're scheduled for a procedure the next 3 days from now. I think for other situations, I've seen very successfully use just pads and phones and AR as a distraction. And it really depends on the situation. I think for a venipuncture, I think you could probably distract kids pretty well with an AR system. For lumbar puncture, I'm not so sure. So.
Okay, so that's all the time that we have. Thank you very much to our panelists for taking the time. If you have any more questions, please feel free to go up and speak to them.